You think you can take my land? Think again. The words barely escaped my lips as I stared down at the eviction notice in my hand. The sun was barely rising over the Texas hills, casting a warm glow on the land my family had owned for generations. It was supposed to be a peaceful morning. But then Karen Whitmore, the HOA president, decided she'd play God with my property. She had no idea who she was messing with. She thought a piece of paper would push me around. What she didn't know: I governed every HOA nationwide. I wasn't some small-town rancher just going to roll over and let her steal from me. As I read the letter, my blood boiled. The nerve of this woman, sending someone like me a notice, telling me to vacate my own land. She didn't know my history, my family, or the blood, sweat, and tears we've poured into this place. This ranch isn't just land to me. It's my legacy, my inheritance, and my home. My grandfather fought for this land. My father worked it until the day he passed. And now, I was standing there, holding a paper that threatened to take it all away. Karen stood across the yard, clipboard in hand, watching me closely. I could feel her smug smile from here. She had no idea what she was in for. "I'm afraid you'll have to leave," she said with a tone as cold as ice. "The HOA has decided," I cut her off, folding the letter and stuffing it in my pocket. "You don't get it, Karen," I said, walking toward her. "You don't run this land. You don't run me. And you definitely don't control what happens here." Her eyes widened slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. "You can't just ignore the rules." I stepped closer, my boots crunching against the gravel. "You think you've got power, don't you? Well, you've picked the wrong person to mess with. What you don't realize is, I control every HOA in this country. I don't care about your petty rules. This is my land, and I'll fight for it. You just made a huge mistake." The wind picked up as I turned away, feeling the weight of what was about to come. This wasn't just about land anymore. This was about power. And Karen had no idea what she was up against. As the morning wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play here. My mind raced as I thought about how this all started. This land, this ranch, wasn't just property, it was a part of me. My grandfather, Pops as we called him, bought this land back in the 50s when Texas was still wild and untamed. It was never meant to be a suburban development, no matter how much the HOAs and Karen Whitmore wanted to make it one. I had been away for years, serving in the army, working my way up to a respected position. When Pops passed, I inherited the ranch, but it was more than just land to me, it was my roots. It held the memories of my father teaching me to hunt, of learning the ropes of ranching, and of watching the sun set behind the hills with Pops. Coming back after my tours in Afghanistan, I thought I was finally going to get some peace. But that peace shattered when I saw what Karen had done. She thought she could take this place from me with a piece of paper. That's when I realized that I wasn't just going to sit back and let her have it. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I wasn't just some rancher she could push around. I was a trained army engineer, with the skills to build and destroy. I knew exactly how to fight back. And this time, it wasn't going to be a simple legal battle. I had something much bigger in mind. I walked back to my truck, my boots crunching against the gravel. The cool morning air filled my lungs as I pulled out my phone and started making calls. I wasn't going to let Karen or the HOA control my future. It was time to remind them exactly who owned this land. I wasn't just some soldier with a rifle, I was a man with a plan, and I wasn't going to lose this fight. I dialed my lawyer, then reached out to a few trusted friends who could help. My sister, Sarah, wasn't much help with the land. She lived in California and didn't understand the intricacies of Texas land law, but I knew she'd support me in any way she could. As the calls went through, I couldn't help but think of my father's words. When you inherit something, it's not just land. It's your responsibility to protect it, and to protect what's right. He was right. I wasn't going to let Karen win. Not now. Not ever. By noon, the sun was beating down hard, but I couldn't stop thinking about Karen and her blatant overreach. She thought she could walk in here, on my property, and dictate my life. But I wasn't going to let her. I'd spent years learning to navigate the bureaucratic red tape of the army, and if there was one thing I knew, it was how to turn the tables on someone who underestimated me. I walked around the ranch, checking the old oak tree by the road, the rusted fence my father had built, and the small dam Pops had put in place years ago. This land was everything to me, and I wasn't going to let some HOA president tear it apart. As I reached the edge of the field, I saw her. Karen was walking her dog, a smug smile plastered on her face, as if she had already won. She had no idea what was coming. I turned and walked back to the house, grabbed my laptop, and started doing what I do best, digging into the details. First, I needed to know exactly what kind of power Karen had, and what she thought she could get away with. It didn't take long to find the zoning laws and property rights that would give me an edge. The more I read, the clearer it became. Karen and the HOA had no legal standing to take my land. They had no claim to it. I wasn't just fighting for my property, I was fighting to keep the integrity of the land that had been passed down through generations. I made a few more calls. This time, I reached out to a former colleague, Mark, a legal advisor I had worked with in the army. He knew exactly how to navigate situations like this, and I was counting on him to help me make a solid case. While I waited for him to get back to me, I kept working the ranch, putting my energy into something productive. It was hard to concentrate, though. I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was getting bolder, that she was planning her next move. By the time Mark called, I had a plan in mind. With his help, we would take the legal route, but we would also take advantage of every single loophole. Karen had no idea what she had just triggered. This fight was just beginning. The next day, I woke up early, knowing I had to stay ahead of Karen. I couldn't afford to sit back and wait for her to make the next move. As I walked across the ranch, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. This was my territory, and no one, no matter how powerful they thought they were, was going to take it from me. The morning sun was low, casting long shadows over the fields, and the sound of the wind moving through the trees reminded me of the years I had spent here with Pops. I wasn't just protecting land, I was protecting memories, the legacy of my family. That's when the phone call came. It was Mark, the lawyer. "Jake, I've got the information you need. We found a couple of critical details in the HOA's bylaws that could work in our favor," he said. I could hear the confidence in his voice. It was exactly what I needed to hear. "I'm listening," I replied, eager to get to work. Mark explained that the HOA had violated several zoning laws when they attempted to take my land. They had no legal grounds to force me out, and they had made several mistakes in the way they handled the paperwork. It was a major loophole, and I was going to use it. With Mark's help, I started gathering the necessary documents. I went through every legal paper I had, every map, every contract. This wasn't just about fighting a petty HOA president. This was about protecting what was mine, and I wasn't going to let them win. As the day went on, I could feel the pressure building. Karen was likely planning her next move, and I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing me back down. I started making arrangements to meet with a judge who could help move this along quickly. I couldn't waste any more time. As I prepared the final details of my case, I felt a surge of determination. This wasn't going to be a long, drawn-out battle. I had the upper hand now, and it was time to use my resources. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how out of her league Karen was. She had no idea what she was up against. She thought this was just another battle she could win with a few papers and her fake authority. She couldn't have been more wrong. With the legal strategy in place, I was ready for the showdown. Karen wasn't going to win this one. Not on my watch. It was the afternoon when I got the call from Mark. "Jake, we've got everything in place. The judge is on board, and we're ready to file." A wave of relief washed over me. The legal path was clear. I wasn't going to waste another second. The day I'd been preparing for was finally here. I gathered my documents, double-checked everything, and made my way to the courthouse. As I walked into the building, I could almost feel the weight of history in those old walls. This wasn't just about one small ranch in Texas. This was about setting the record straight. When I sat down in front of the judge, I could see the skepticism in her eyes. She had no idea how much I had prepared for this moment. "So, you're claiming the HOA has been acting outside of their legal boundaries?" she asked, her voice cool. I nodded confidently, sliding the paperwork across the desk. "Yes, Your Honor. They have violated several zoning laws and failed to follow proper procedures." The judge glanced at the papers, clearly taking her time to absorb the facts. It felt like an eternity before she looked back up, her expression unreadable. I held my breath. Then, finally, she spoke. "I'll review this and make a decision. This is a serious matter, Mr. Thompson. You better be sure about this." I nodded again. "I'm sure, Your Honor. This land has been in my family for 3 generations. I'm not backing down." The judge gave a curt nod and signaled for us to leave. As I walked out of the courtroom, I couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. It wasn't over, but I had made the first major move in a battle that was about to get a lot bigger. Back on the ranch, I checked my phone and saw Karen's name. She'd left a message. "I'm sure you know by now, but the HOA is serious about this. You'd better move out, or there will be consequences." I couldn't help but smile. Karen had no idea what was coming. She thought she had the upper hand, but she was about to learn that I wasn't someone she could push around. I wasn't backing down, not now, not ever. The next few days felt like an eternity. I spent every waking moment preparing, making calls, and gathering the last pieces of evidence for my case. It wasn't just about proving the HOA was in the wrong, it was about making sure they never thought they could walk all over people like me again. I didn't just want to win, I wanted to set a precedent. Karen had no idea the storm she was about to face. Every time I saw her, walking down the road with that smug look on her face, it only fueled my determination. The more she acted like she was in control, the more I wanted to prove her wrong. I kept my eyes on the prize, this land, my family's history, and the legacy Pops had worked so hard to build. But things were escalating quickly. I knew Karen was feeling the pressure, because I could see her starting to play more aggressively. She'd made a few more calls to my neighbors, trying to convince them I was some kind of troublemaker, that I didn't care about the community. I couldn't let her tear apart everything my family had built. I had to push back. By the time the next court date arrived, I felt ready. Mark had helped me put together a solid case. We had proof that the HOA had violated property rights, misused zoning laws, and failed to follow the proper procedures. All we needed now was the judge to see things our way. As I walked into the courtroom that morning, I felt a sense of calm. This was it, the moment everything would change. Karen was sitting on the other side of the room, her arms crossed, looking as if she thought she had already won. But I could tell that something was different this time. The judge entered, and everything went quiet. I stood tall, ready to speak. The judge looked at me, then at Karen, and then back at me. "Mr. Thompson, I've reviewed your case, and I'm prepared to make a ruling today." My heart raced. But I kept my expression steady. Karen's eyes narrowed as she realized this wasn't going the way she expected. It was time. I had everything in place. It was now a waiting game to see if Karen's arrogance would finally catch up with her. The judge paused for what felt like an eternity. I could feel the weight of the room shift as everyone waited for her decision. Karen's face had lost some of its earlier smugness, replaced by a look of uncertainty. She was trying to keep her cool, but I could tell she was nervous. I leaned back in my chair, my hand steady as I waited for the moment that would determine everything. Finally, the judge spoke. "After reviewing the evidence, I've come to a decision. The HOA, represented by Ms. Whitmore, has indeed overstepped its legal bounds. You have presented clear evidence that their actions were unlawful. My heart skipped a beat. Karen's face turned pale as the judge continued. As of today, the eviction notice is invalid, and the HOA's claims against your property are hereby dismissed. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. The weight I had been carrying for weeks, even months, suddenly lifted off my shoulders. The land was mine. The judge turned her gaze to Karen. I suggest you review the bylaws more carefully in the future, Ms. Whitmore. And if there are any further actions taken against Mr. Thompson or his property, I expect to see you back here. This is your warning. The words were final. The case was over. Karen stood there, stunned, unable to speak. I could feel a sense of satisfaction, not from the defeat of another person, but from the knowledge that I had fought for what was rightfully mine. I wasn't just protecting land, I was protecting the legacy of my family, something I wasn't willing to let anyone tear down. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt like a weight had been lifted from my chest. I had won, but more importantly, I had proven that no one could just walk in and take what didn't belong to them. Karen might have thought she could win with a few legal tricks, but she had underestimated me. I wasn't just a rancher. I was a man who had learned to fight for what he loved, and today, that fight had paid off. As the days passed after the ruling, I felt a sense of victory that I hadn't fully understood until now. The land was mine, and Karen's attempt to seize it had been thwarted. But it wasn't just about winning a legal battle, it was about standing up for what was right. It was about ensuring that people like Karen couldn't just walk into a community, throw their weight around, and take what didn't belong to them. I could still remember the moment the judge made her ruling, the way Karen had frozen in disbelief, unable to process the reality that she had lost. But as satisfying as that moment was, I knew it wasn't over. The HOA had already shown their hand, and I wasn't going to let them get away with any more shady tactics. I had a responsibility to the land, to my family, and to the community to make sure this didn't happen again. I reached out to Mark, the lawyer who had helped me with the case, and asked him to look into the HOA's history. We needed to make sure they weren't pulling the same tricks with other homeowners in the area. Mark got back to me a few days later with some troubling news. The HOA had a history of pushing boundaries, using its power to intimidate and pressure people into selling their properties. Some had fought back, but most had simply given in, unable to withstand the legal and financial pressure. I felt a fire ignite inside me. This wasn't just about protecting my property anymore. This was about ensuring the safety and rights of everyone in the community. I couldn't let Karen and her HOA get away with bullying people into submission. We started gathering evidence of the HOA's illegal practices, making sure we had everything documented. I reached out to my neighbors, explaining what had happened, and before long, we were forming a small coalition of homeowners who were ready to stand up for their rights. The more we uncovered, the more I realized how deep this went. Karen had been the face of a system that had been exploiting people for far too long. But I wasn't going to let it continue. I wasn't alone anymore. I had a team behind me, and together, we would make sure Karen and her HOA would never again walk all over people who just wanted to live in peace. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight, but we were ready. The battle for justice had only just begun. The first meeting with my neighbors was set for that weekend, and by the time Saturday rolled around, I could feel the weight of the responsibility settling on my shoulders. What I didn't expect was how many people had been quietly suffering under Karen's rule. As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw several familiar faces. Some of them were people I had known for years, but most were new to me. They all shared one thing in common: frustration. I walked into the community hall, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and nervous energy. The room was filled with about 20 homeowners, all of them looking at me with a mix of hope and curiosity. As I stepped forward, I could feel the energy in the room shift. They were all ready to hear what I had to say. I know many of you have been dealing with this for a long time, I began, my voice steady and strong. I've been through it too, and I'm not going to let it go any longer. We need to fight back. As I spoke, I could see the relief in their eyes. They were ready. The frustration they had been carrying for so long had finally found an outlet. We've got the legal grounds, and now we need to come together, I continued. It's time for this HOA to answer for what they've done, not just to me, but to all of us. The room erupted in applause, and I felt a surge of confidence. It wasn't just my fight anymore. We were a team now, and that made all the difference. Over the next few weeks, we worked together, gathering evidence, sharing stories, and preparing for the next steps. We weren't just fighting for our homes, we were fighting for our community. It wasn't going to be easy, but it felt like we had something more powerful on our side now: unity. The deeper we dug into the HOA's activities, the more we uncovered. They had been involved in shady dealings for years, pushing people out of their homes, pressuring them into selling, and making illegal threats. But now, we had the proof. We had the legal team, the resources, and most importantly, we had each other. One evening, as we sat down to review the next step in our plan, I looked around the table at the faces of my neighbors. I realized how far we had come in such a short time. Together, we had taken a stand. And together, we would take down Karen and her corrupt HOA once and for all. As we prepared for the next phase, the tension was palpable. It was no longer just about legal paperwork. This had become a mission, a fight for our community's future. The plan was clear now. We would use the evidence we'd gathered to not only take down Karen, but to expose the HOA's entire corrupt system. Our legal team was ready. The documents were in place. And as I looked around at my neighbors, all of them determined, all of them committed, I knew we had a real chance. But then Karen made her move. She didn't back down. If anything, she grew more aggressive. The HOA sent out new letters, threatening legal action and fines for trivial matters. They were trying to break our spirits, but they didn't know what they were up against. The next meeting was set, and this time, it was going to be bigger. It wasn't just the usual HOA boardroom. We were bringing in outside observers, media, and, most importantly, our legal team. As the day of the meeting approached, I could feel the weight of it all. We had gathered support from other neighborhoods that had suffered the same fate. Word had spread, and now it was no longer just a local issue. Karen and her board were about to face the consequences of years of abuse. The meeting room was full when I walked in. Karen was sitting at the front, looking as though she hadn't seen the storm coming. Her usual confidence had faded, replaced by an unease that I could feel across the room. As I stood up to speak, I could see the eyes of my neighbors on me. This was our moment. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice steady, we are here today not just to defend my property, but to defend every single one of you from the practices of this HOA. We've gathered the evidence, and we're not backing down. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. What Karen Whitmore and this HOA have done is illegal. And today, we are here to make sure they are held accountable. I could see Karen's face turn white as the evidence was laid out in front of her. She had no way of escaping this. She had pushed too far, and now she was going to pay the price. The board was silent, but the tension in the room was thick. This was it. The fight for our community's future was happening right now. And there was no turning back. The room was silent as the last piece of evidence was placed on the table, a weighty document that spelled out the HOA's illegal practices in black and white. Karen was no longer sitting confidently at the front of the room, her hands were shaking, her face pale. I could feel the momentum shift as everyone realized this wasn't just a fight about land anymore. This was about the truth, and the truth was about to hit harder than anything Karen had ever dealt with. I stood tall, my voice steady as I spoke. This isn't just about one person or one property. This is about all of us, about protecting our homes, our rights, and our community. Karen looked up, her eyes darting from one face to the next, as if searching for a way out. But there was no escape. The evidence was clear, and the board had no choice but to listen. You've tried to bully us, to push us around, but you've underestimated the strength of this community, I continued. You've underestimated the power of the people who live here. The board sat in stunned silence. They had been complicit in this for years, turning a blind eye to Karen's tactics, but now it was clear that their reign of power was over. It was time for them to answer for what they'd done. As the meeting progressed, I could feel the energy in the room shift. The community was rallying behind each other, and there was a sense of unity that had been missing for far too long. We were no longer just fighting for one person's property, we were fighting for the integrity of our entire neighborhood. Karen's face grew darker with each passing minute. She was trying to regain control, but the walls were closing in. She attempted to speak up, but the judge, who had been observing from the side, raised a hand to silence her. "I think we've heard enough," the judge said, his voice firm. "It's clear that the HOA has violated several legal boundaries, and I believe it's time to take appropriate action." My heart raced as I realized that we were about to win. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment where everything would change. Karen and the board could no longer hide behind their false authority. They were going to face the consequences of their actions. As the judge called for a recess, I allowed myself a brief moment of relief. But I knew the fight wasn't over. It had just begun. Now, it was time to finish what we had started and make sure that Karen's days of bullying our community were over for good. As the judge returned, I could feel the tension in the room build. Karen was sitting rigidly in her chair, clearly attempting to regain some composure, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. The room, once filled with the murmur of conversations, had grown completely silent, every person in it waiting for the decision that would end this ordeal. The judge cleared his throat and spoke, his voice steady. "After reviewing the evidence and hearing both sides, it is clear that the actions of the HOA, under the leadership of Ms. Whitmore, were unlawful. The attempts to evict Mr. Thompson were not only unfounded but were a violation of his property rights." I held my breath as he paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I hereby rule in favor of Mr. Thompson. The eviction notice is invalid, and the HOA will be required to cease all further actions against his property. Furthermore, the board will be held accountable for their illegal conduct." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as the room erupted into murmurs of disbelief. Karen's face was a mixture of shock and anger, but there was no denying it, she had lost. As the judge made the final rulings, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. This had been more than just a legal battle. It had been a fight for the integrity of my land, for my family's legacy, and for my neighbors who had been silently suffering under the tyranny of the HOA. I turned to look at the people around me. They were smiling, some even tearing up. I had done it. We had done it. Together, we had taken down an unjust system. But as I looked at Karen, I knew that this wasn't just a victory for me, it was a victory for anyone who had ever been pushed around by a powerful organization. It was a statement that we would no longer be silenced or bullied into submission. After the judge's final words, Karen and her board members left the room, defeated. I stood there for a moment, absorbing the weight of it all, before stepping out into the hallway where the real work was just beginning. We still had a community to rebuild, a system to reform, and people to help. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope that we could move forward. It wasn't just about winning a case. It was about making sure something like this would never happen again. As the weeks went by, the mood in the neighborhood shifted. People who had once felt powerless now walked with their heads held high, a sense of justice and pride settling over the community. We had proven something together, no one, not even the most powerful HOA, could just walk over us without consequences. Karen's defeat was only the beginning. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about what we had achieved, about the foundation we had laid for something better. The property was safe, but the real victory was the change in the atmosphere. People began speaking out more, voicing their concerns, and standing up for their rights. Neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak at HOA meetings now stood with confidence, their voices strong and unwavering. We had set a precedent that would last long after Karen and her board were gone. But the work wasn't done. There was still the matter of ensuring that the HOA was reformed and that no one would ever go through what I had experienced. I took it upon myself to meet with the remaining members of the HOA, insisting that they listen to the needs of the community. With the support of my neighbors, we set new standards, ones based on fairness and respect. No longer would people be harassed or intimidated by an organization designed to protect them. As for Karen, well, she disappeared from the scene. She tried to fight back in the media, but the community was united now, and her efforts fell flat. No one was listening anymore. Her reign of terror had come to an end. The next few months were filled with changes, small but meaningful. The HOA meetings became open forums for everyone to express their opinions, and the fear that once plagued the community was replaced with a renewed sense of empowerment. I continued to work the land, just as I had always done. My father's tools were now mine, and the ranch that had been at the center of the battle was thriving once again. I knew the fight had been hard, but it was worth it. The land was no longer just a piece of property, it was a symbol of what happens when people stand together, when they fight for what's right. And as I stood there one evening, looking out over the fields, I knew my family's legacy was secure. We had won, not just for me, but for everyone in the community who had been brave enough to speak up. It was more than a victory, it was a new beginning.